If you'd asked me growing up what my place was in the family, I'd have told you I was the designated background character. You know, the one in old sitcoms who stands near the fridge, smiling vaguely while the real stars deliver punchlines. That was me, Eli Crawford, age 32, professional afterthought. Meanwhile, my older brother, Brandon, was the main event, the charismatic golden boy with $1 million smile and a negative dollar sense of responsibility. Brandon could break something, his car, a relationship, a business idea, and my parents would applaud him for taking risks. I'd get an eye roll if I so much as mentioned I'd paid my rent on time. I was the boring one. The steady one. The one who made lists and spreadsheets while Brandon bounced from career to career like he was collecting them like trading cards. The first time I realized he was different was when we were 12 and 15. Brandon set the backyard on fire trying to build a science experiment. Mom called it inventive. I got grounded for telling him it was stupid. So I learned to keep my head down and be the responsible one. By 15, I had a job at the local grocery store, bagging cantaloupes for people who treated me like their personal butler. While Brandon was busy breaking curfews, I was busy working the early shift before school. Through high school, I started side gigs, fixing old computers, selling refurbished phones on Craigslist, anything to squirrel away a little money. By 21, I was freelancing in web design, living on instant ramen and YouTube tutorials. At 26, I finally caught a break. One of my clients liked my work enough to recommend me to a chain of restaurants needing a full rebrand. Suddenly, I had contracts. Real ones. With terms longer than 2 pages. 2 years later, I bought a little brick house in Springfield, Missouri. 3 bedrooms, a squeaky front porch, and a furnace older than most of my coworkers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I remember calling my mom to tell her the news. Her response? Well, that's nice, Eli, but are you sure you don't want to wait to get something less boring? Brandon would have gotten a parade and a write-up in the church bulletin. I paid for the house myself. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every new appliance when the old ones finally gave up. I even bought them a new washer when theirs died in the middle of January. I didn't do it because they asked. I did it because it felt like the right thing to do. But somehow, that never counted. To them, Brandon was the dreamer. I was the worker bee. When I visited for holidays, my dad would lean back in his recliner and ask in that same bored tone, "So, you still hiding behind all that work?" Like being able to pay my bills without asking them for a dime was a moral failing. At Thanksgiving, my mom would squeeze my hand and say, "You know, Eli, you have too much money and not enough memories." As if I spent my nights alone counting $100 bills while everyone else lived in a Hallmark movie. It wasn't like I was out here trying to prove them wrong. I just liked knowing I could take care of myself. But still, some stupid part of me hoped they'd see me as more than a convenient wallet with a pulse. Every Christmas, I'd buy them something big, like a new recliner or a fancy microwave. And every year, Brandon would show up late with a bottle of wine he'd picked up at the gas station, and they'd act like he delivered the Grail itself. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was above caring what they thought. But if I'm being honest, it ate at me. Every little remark, every shrug, every time Brandon was celebrated for trying and failing while I was ignored for quietly succeeding. I never said any of this out loud. Not to them. Not to Brandon. Not even to my friends. Because if I admitted it hurt, it felt like I was proving them right, that I was the fragile one, the one who couldn't handle a little teasing. So I kept my head down. I kept sending money. I kept pretending it didn't matter. Until the night everything snapped in half. The night of my mother's 60th birthday, I told myself, naively, that maybe this would be different. Maybe a milestone like 60 would soften the edges, remind everyone that family was more than a scoreboard of who did what. Spoiler, it didn't. My dad insisted he'd planned everything himself, a private event, at some trendy restaurant with the word bistro in the name, even though they served the same rubbery chicken you could get anywhere. I offered to pay. He waved me off with the same dismissive grunt he used when I asked if he needed help fixing the gutters. So you can imagine my confusion when, the week before, I got a voicemail from the restaurant manager. "Hi, Mr. Crawford, Just confirming your card is on file for the deposit. Let us know if you'd like the balance to be charged after the dinner. I sat in my office, phone pressed to my ear, feeling my stomach drop like I'd hit a pothole. I should have called my dad and asked why my card was even on file. Maybe I could have canceled it. Maybe I could have at least said something. But instead, I just sat there, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. The night of the dinner, I arrived 10 minutes early. I watched as the host set the long table with candles and those stiff white napkins folded into little pyramids. I took the seat at the far end, quietly arranging my gift bag on the chair beside me. The room filled up fast, relatives I hadn't seen since Brandon's last engagement party, the one that ended in a screaming match over a DJ deposit, neighbors who called me Eli, the quiet one. And, of course, Brandon himself. He walked in late, wearing a suit a little too tight in the shoulders and a grin that could sell life insurance to a corpse. He made the rounds, hugging everyone, clapping backs, telling the same recycled stories. Every time he passed me, he gave me a nod that felt like a pat on the head you'd give a particularly obedient golden retriever. Dinner was exactly what I expected: overcooked chicken, undercooked compliments, and the faint hum of tension everyone pretended not to notice. I sat there, smiling politely, fielding questions about whether I was still single and if I'd thought about taking a break from all that work. Like my job was a bad habit I needed to quit. Then came the toast. Brandon stood, glass raised, beaming like he was the host of an awards show. "Here's to Mom, who somehow put up with us all these years," he began, eliciting polite laughter. "And to Dad, who taught us how to work hard, even if some of us took longer to figure it out." More laughter. My stomach tightened. I knew where this was going. "And finally," he said, turning his gaze to me, his smile sharpening into something mean, "to Eli, the failure who thinks money makes him worth something." The room erupted in laughter. Real, genuine laughter that made my skin prickle. My mother actually covered her mouth like she was trying to stifle a giggle. My dad shook his head, grinning like Brandon had just delivered the punchline of the year. I felt heat crawl up my neck. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he hadn't really said it. But the looks on their faces confirmed it. They thought it was hilarious. Like I was some kind of party trick they'd all been waiting to laugh at. I glanced down at my hands, gripping the stem of my glass so tight I thought it might snap. Some part of me, a part one didn't even know was still alive, wanted to stand up and scream. To tell them how much I'd done, how much I'd given up, how I'd spent years trying to buy their approval with every check, every gift, every quiet compromise. But I didn't. Instead, I looked up and realized something so clear it almost made me dizzy. They weren't ever going to change. Not for me. Not for anyone. When the laughter died down, Brandon dropped back into his chair, smirking at me over the rim of his glass. I forced a smile. It felt foreign on my face. The rest of the dinner blurred together. Polite conversation I couldn't hear. Dessert I didn't taste. A slideshow of family photos I barely watched. When the bill came, the server walked directly to me, confirming, "Mr. Crawford, would you like us to put this on the card we have on file?" My father looked up, surprised. "Oh, Eli, you didn't have to do that." But there was no apology in his tone. Just a lazy sort of satisfaction, like he'd expected nothing less. I signed the receipt. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I stood, carefully picked up my gift bag, and walked out without a word. Behind me, I heard Brandon laugh again. If they noticed I was gone, no one followed. I wish I could say I left that dinner with some grand plan. That I stormed out ready to reclaim my dignity with one perfect speech. But the truth was simpler. I went home and sat on my couch for an hour, staring at the dark TV screen while Brandon's toast replayed in my head on a loop. My phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't pick it up. Let them wonder where I was. For once, I wasn't going to explain myself. When I finally unlocked my phone, I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. I opened my banking app instead. All the automatic payments were still there, lined up in neat little rows: mortgage assistance, insurance, utilities, Brandon's old car payment I'd been covering. Just until he got back on his feet. The quiet ways I'd kept them comfortable while they mocked me. I scrolled through the list, my thumb hovering. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt done. I started canceling them one by one. The electricity bill. The internet. The insurance policies. The subscriptions. When I reached the mortgage payment, I hesitated. Then I canceled that too. It felt cold. It also felt honest. I closed the app, sat back, and exhaled. Not a triumphant exhale, more like a tired sigh I'd been holding for years. My phone buzzed again, Brandon calling for the fourth time. I turned it off. I spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing countertops, wiping down the fridge, sweeping the floor. Something about putting my own space in order calmed me in a way nothing else could. Around midnight, I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I called it simply ledger.excelsex. Then I began listing every dollar. The furnace I'd paid for. The vacations I'd quietly subsidized so they wouldn't cancel. The credit cards I'd cleared. Every deposit. Every loan I'd forgiven. No commentary. Just numbers. When I finished, it was 6 pages long. I attached it to an email addressed to my parents and Brandon. Subject line, since you forgot. I hovered over send. Then I clicked it and closed my laptop. No flourish. Just finality. I went to bed and slept deeper than I had in years. In the morning, I turned my phone back on. The notifications came in instantly. Voicemails from my mother. Eli, please call me back. We need to talk. You misunderstood everything. Brandon was joking. Text from my father. Is this about last night? You're overreacting. You're being childish. And Brandon. Dude, seriously? Grow up. I didn't reply. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the steam rise, feeling something that almost felt like peace. At 10 a.m., there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing there holding a box of pastries. The same kind she used to buy when she wanted to smooth things over. For a second, I thought about pretending I wasn't home. But some part of me was curious to hear what she'd say. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Hi, sweetheart, she said, voice small. I thought we could talk. About what? She looked down at the box. About everything. You know your brother needs more help than you do. You've always been stronger. There it was, the same tired excuse. I was strong, so I didn't need respect. I shook my head. I'm done, I said. I'm not your safety net anymore. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing except relief. She started to speak, but I held up my hand. Take the pastries with you, I said quietly. They don't fix anything. For a moment I thought she'd argue. But she just nodded, turned, and walked away. I closed the door and locked it. Then I leaned my forehead against the wood and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for years. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory. It was freedom. The morning after my mother left with her box of pastries, I expected to feel regret. I kept waiting for the shame to wash over me like it always did after I stood up for myself. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a strange, clear-headed calm. Like I'd finally stepped outside a house that had been on fire for years and realized I didn't have to keep breathing the smoke. My phone was still going off. New emails. More voicemails. A few texts from my dad. Eli, call us. You're making this worse. You don't understand the damage you're causing. Family doesn't do this to each other. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts again. Just to be sure everything was cancelled. No more quiet withdrawals in the middle of the night. No more. We'll pay you back next month. No more anything. After that, I did something that surprised even me. I pulled up an old folder I hadn't looked at in years, financial records from the time Brandon's first business failed. It was supposed to be a temporary setback, according to him. But the setback lasted 4 years and cost me almost $18,000 in loans I'd been too embarrassed to admit I'd given. I started going through everything I'd ever paid. It took hours. Utility bills, credit card balances, surprise medical expenses, emergency, rent deposits when Brandon couldn't be bothered to budget. I cross-referenced receipts and bank statements until my eyes ached. By the end of the day, I had a spreadsheet so detailed it looked like an audit. Every dollar, every date, every note. All the evidence of just how much of my life I'd handed over without question. I attached it to a second email. No subject line this time. No explanation. Just a file named ledger.xlsx and a single sentence in the body. Since you never kept track. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop and went outside for a walk. It was a cold afternoon, the kind where your breath comes out in little white clouds. I stuck my hands in my pockets and walked around my neighborhood until the sun set. I didn't think about the emails or the calls. I didn't think about what they'd say when they opened that file. I just let myself be quiet. When I got home, there were 6 new voicemails waiting. I played them on speaker while I made tea, just to get it over with. My dad's voice, taut and irritated. You're blowing this out of proportion. This isn't how family handles disagreements. You're humiliating us. Brandon's voice, dripping with disdain. Wow, man. A spreadsheet? Really? That's pathetic. You've always been obsessed with money. No wonder you're alone. And my mother, her tone brittle and pleading. Eli, please. We can talk this out. You know Brandon's had a hard time. You've always been so good with money. It just made sense for you to help. It was like listening to a greatest hits album I never asked to buy. The same refrains. You're overreacting. You're ungrateful. You're the problem. But this time, it didn't stick. Their voices felt small. Distant. The next morning, I woke to an email from my dad. It was longer than anything he'd ever written me. Paragraphs of justification. A few half-hearted apologies buried under excuses. And then, at the very end, a confession. We took out a line of credit against the house 2 years ago to help Brandon. We didn't tell you because you'd already done enough. The debt is considerable. He wants to sell the house to cover it. I read it twice. Then a third time. It didn't feel real. I'd known things were bad, but not that bad. There was an attachment. Bank statements showing withdrawals month after month. Thousands of dollars going straight into Brandon's account. The house that had been paid off for 20 years was now leveraged to the edge. I closed the email and rubbed my eyes. It was the closest my father had ever come to admitting he'd used me. That he'd chosen Brandon's chaos over my stability every single time. But even then, he couldn't say it outright. It was easier to frame it as a burden they'd reluctantly taken on. Easier to pretend it had all just happened. I sat there at my kitchen table, the morning light creeping across the floor, and felt something click into place. This was never going to change. Not unless I changed it myself. I didn't reply to my dad's email right away. I knew if I did, I'd get pulled back into the same tired dance, justifying my feelings, second-guessing my boundaries. So I left it unread in my inbox and went about my day. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. When I opened it, my mother was standing there again, gripping that same box of pastries like it was a peace treaty. Eli, she began, her voice shaky. I know you're upset, but can we please talk? Not over emails. Just face to face. I didn't step aside to let her in. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and waited. She looked past me, as if expecting to see some audience who might applaud her effort. She tried a small smile. Can I come in? I shook my head. I think it's better if we talk here. She sighed, the kind of theatrical exhale that used to make me feel guilty enough to cave. You have to understand, she said. Your brother, he's always needed more help. You've always been so independent. So strong. We knew you'd be okay. I stared at her. The words were so familiar I could have mouthed them along with her. It was the same script she'd recited my whole life. Eli is fine. Eli doesn't need as much. Eli can handle it. She shifted the pastry box in her hands. You know we love you, she went on, her eyes shiny with unshed tears. But Brandon, he's had a harder time. You've always been the one we could count on. And you never thought that maybe I didn't want to be the one you could count on, I said quietly. She blinked. I don't know what you mean. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable it felt scripted. You never asked if I was okay, I said. Not once. You never asked how it felt to watch you celebrate him for failing over and over while you treated my success like something to be embarrassed about. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down, staring at the box like she could find better answers in the pastries. You always said I was strong, I continued. Like that was a compliment. But it wasn't. It was an excuse. You used it to justify taking everything you could from me without ever giving anything back. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I didn't feel moved. I felt tired. We didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. Everything we did was because we love you both. I nodded slowly. I believe you, I said. But it doesn't matter. I'm done. She looked up, startled. Done? With paying for everything. With pretending this is normal. With pretending you didn't choose him over me 100 times. But what about the house? She asked, voice rising. If we lose it? I'm not here to watch you lose your home, I said. But I'm also not going to let Brandon keep draining you until there's nothing left. She swallowed hard, her face crumpling. You don't understand. He's your brother. He's family. I know, I said. And he can be your responsibility now. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she did something I hadn't expected. She stepped back. Her shoulders slumped. And in that second, I could see how exhausted she was too. How many years she'd spent covering for him. I don't know what you expect us to do, she said, her voice small. I expect you to figure it out, I replied. Just like I did. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I closed the door gently, locked it, and walked into the kitchen. I stood by the window, watching her walk down the driveway, her steps slow and unsteady. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the bad son. I felt like a man who'd finally decided he was allowed to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to stop taking. When my phone buzzed again, I ignored it. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened a blank document. I titled it Plan. It was time to figure out how to protect the only thing left they hadn't managed to drain, my peace. For the rest of the day, I didn't hear anything from my parents. No calls. No emails. No knocks at the door. I told myself it was over, that maybe, finally, they'd gotten the message. But I should have known better. That evening, I found a manila envelope sitting on my front step. No postage. No note. Just my name written in my father's tight, careful handwriting. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen counter. For a few minutes, I just stood there staring at it. Part of me didn't want to open it. I was tired of discovering new ways they'd disappointed me. But ignoring it wouldn't change anything. When I finally peeled back the flap, a stack of papers slid out, bank statements, loan documents, and a short typed letter clipped on top. Eli. I'm sending this because you deserve to know everything. We took out a line of credit against the house 2 years ago. It was the only way to keep up with Brandon's expenses. He promised he'd pay us back when his business took off. It never did. I didn't tell you because you'd already done so much. We didn't want you to feel obligated to step in again. But now the credit line is maxed out, and the bank is threatening foreclosure. Brandon wants to sell the house to cover the debt. I'm sorry, Dad. I read the letter twice, my jaw tight. Then I set it aside and went through the statements one by one. Every page felt like a slap. There were transactions for Brandon's rent, Brandon's car repairs, Brandon's consulting fees. Thousands of dollars, month after month, bleeding out of the house they'd always claimed they wanted to leave to both of us someday. I didn't know what made me angrier, how recklessly they'd spent, or how they tried to hide it under the excuse of protecting me. Like I was too fragile to hear the truth, even while they had no problem using my money to prop everything up. It was almost funny. For years they'd called me obsessed with money, said I cared too much about security and not enough about living in the moment. Meanwhile, they'd mortgaged their future to keep Brandon's present comfortable. I stacked the papers neatly and set them back in the envelope. I didn't feel like calling anyone. I didn't want another round of half apologies and justifications. Instead, I called my attorney. Miriam answered on the second ring. Eli? Everything okay? No, I said. But I'm ready to fix it. I explained the situation, keeping my voice steady. Miriam didn't sound surprised. She'd helped me untangle plenty of messes before, though none this big. Let's talk options, she said calmly. You have the means to purchase the house outright. If you do that and set up a trust, your parents can stay in it safely, and Brandon won't be able to borrow against it again. It felt surreal, thinking about buying the house I'd grown up in. The same place where I'd spent so many birthdays being ignored in favor of Brandon's triumphs and disasters. But as I listened to Miriam explain the process, something inside me settled. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to watch my parents lose everything. I just wanted to draw a line Brandon couldn't cross anymore. I want to move forward, I said. I'll buy the house. Okay, Miriam replied. I'll start the paperwork. And Eli, this is generous. But don't let them guilt you into more. I won't, I said. And for once I meant it. We wrapped up the call, and I set my phone down. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. It struck me how peaceful everything looked from here. Like nothing was wrong. The next day, I sent an email to my parents explaining that I'd be purchasing the house, paying off the debt, and placing the deed in a trust they couldn't borrow against. I kept it brief, polite, final. I didn't mention Brandon. I didn't say anything about the years of resentment I'd swallowed. I just stated the facts. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. Thank you? That was all it said. No apology. No explanation. Just 2 words that felt like a ceasefire. I was still staring at the screen when another message came through. This one from Brandon. Are you serious? You're cutting me out? You'd let your own brother drown? I didn't reply. Because finally I understood. I hadn't cut him out. He'd walked out himself, over and over. I just stopped holding the door open. I knew Brandon wouldn't leave it at one text. He never did. He'd always been the kind of person who believed that if he repeated something enough times, it would eventually become true. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone lit up again. I can't believe you're doing this. You think money makes you better than everyone. You're pathetic. A minute later. Call me. Be an adult for once. I didn't respond. I poured coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and watched the steam curl up toward the ceiling. Somewhere in the middle of my second cup, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Not the shaky, anxious kind that comes after you dodge a bullet. A steady, unremarkable quiet. Like a storm had finally passed, and all that was left was the work of cleaning up. I spent the afternoon filling out the paperwork to buy the house. Miriam handled most of it, guiding me through each step with the same calm efficiency she'd shown when I'd first hired her. By the end of the day, it was official. The house was mine. The debts were cleared. The title was held in a trust with my parents as lifetime occupants. There was no ceremony. No thank you party. Just a signed document, and a sense that something final had clicked into place. I thought that might be the end of it. But that evening, there was a knock at my door. I knew before I opened it that it was Brandon. He didn't bother texting first. He'd never understood boundaries. He was standing there in a hoodie and jeans, looking like he'd rolled out of bed angry. He didn't even wait for me to say hello. You really think this is okay? He demanded. Buying the house out from under us like you're some landlord? I kept my hand on the doorknob. It was that or watch the bank take it. He scoffed. Oh, spare me. You love this. You love having something to hold over everyone's head. That's not true, I said. But if it helps you sleep at night to believe it, fine. He stepped closer, crowding the doorway. You're unbelievable. You know that? All this money has turned you into a self-righteous jerk. I felt a flicker of the old impulse, to apologize, to make it easier for him. But it passed. I didn't make you spend yourself into a hole, I said evenly. I didn't make Mom and Dad cover for you. And I didn't make you call me pathetic while you took my help. His mouth opened like he had a retort ready. But nothing came out. I took a breath. Brandon, I'm not going to keep funding your life. That's over. You need to figure it out. You'd really let me sink, he said, voice rising. You just stand by and watch your own brother fail? You've failed plenty of times, I said quietly. And you never cared who got pulled under with you. For a moment, he looked almost young, like the version of him I used to look up to when I was a kid. Then the anger snapped back into place. He shook his head. You're pathetic, he muttered. All that money, and you still think it makes you better? No, I said. It doesn't make me better. But it does mean I don't owe you anything. He stared at me, breathing hard. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. So I stepped back and pulled the door halfway closed. You should go, I said. His jaw clenched. He turned without another word and walked down the steps. He didn't slam the gate behind him. Just let it swing shut with a quiet click. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. This time, I didn't feel like the villain. I felt like someone who'd finally decided he was allowed to protect himself. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a single text from my mother. Thank you for helping with the house. We didn't deserve your grace, but I'm grateful anyway. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I turned my phone off, made tea, and sat in the quiet. It wasn't perfect peace. But it was mine. The next week was quieter than I expected. No more unannounced visits. No more pleading texts. Just the occasional short message from my mother, always polite, always careful. Hope you're well. We appreciate what you did. Let us know if you'd ever like to talk. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Just because I needed the silence more than I needed their explanations. I thought about everything that had led up to this. How many years I'd spent believing if I just gave enough time, enough money, enough patience, something would change. That maybe they'd see me as more than the reliable backup plan. But the truth was simple. I'd never been the problem. I'd just been the solution they liked too much to let go of. One afternoon, I drove by my parents' house. The front yard looked the same as it always had, patchy grass, the old porch swing creaking in the wind. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a chapter 1 was finally ready to close. I parked at the curb and sat there for a while, watching the curtains flutter. I wondered if they were inside talking about me. If they still believed I was the villain in the story they'd written. Then I realized it didn't matter. I didn't need to be the hero in their narrative anymore. A week later, the paperwork finalizing the house purchase arrived in the mail. Miriam included a short note. It's done. You've protected them from themselves. And you've protected yourself too. I set the documents in a drawer, next to the copy of the ledger I'd sent them. Not as trophies. Just reminders. Evidence that I hadn't imagined any of it. That same day, I got a last email from Brandon. It was short, almost startlingly calm. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. I read it twice before closing my laptop. It struck me how little it moved me anymore. He was right in a way, this was what I'd wanted. To be free. To be done. To stop setting myself on fire to keep him warm. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. No dread pooling in my stomach. No instinct to check my phone for the latest crisis. Just a strange, tentative peace. I spent that Saturday doing the things I'd always put off. I went for a long walk without my phone. I cooked an actual breakfast instead of eating over the sink. I read a book cover to cover for the first time in months. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet day, it hit me. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. I didn't have to be the responsible son, the forgiving brother, the quiet benefactor. I could just be Eli. A man with boundaries. A man who'd finally decided he was allowed to keep what he earned. Christmas came and went without an invitation. No cards. No calls. I spent the day with a couple of friends who'd become more like family than my blood relatives ever were. We cooked too much food, watched old movies, and laughed until it felt like something inside me healed a little. When the evening wound down, my friend Mason handed me a small box. Inside was a simple wooden sign. It read, "Your worth isn't measured in what you give away." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. Later that night, I hung it by my front door. Every morning when I left the house, I saw it. A reminder that no one could ever take from me again without my permission. That was the thing about finally drawing the line. It didn't feel like burning a bridge. It felt like building a fence around the parts of me I'd spent too long giving away for free. And if my family ever decided to stand on the other side of that fence, waving their apologies and their half-finished explanations, well, that was their choice. I'd made mine.